Hello, everybody. Okay, this is part two of part one regarding the request for repair. On page two of the request for repair, after the buyer fills out all this information as to what they request, if their lender is requesting anything, whether they're going to remove contingencies, and they have an understanding when this request for repair is going to expire, then on page two, paragraph 6, the buyer will sign and date. But with that, it says here in red, any previous request for repair or seller's response and buyer's reply to request for repair can no longer be accepted. The seller's response to buyer's reply or request for repair will finalize all agreed upon request, which is what the RRRR form is. This is seller's response to buyer's reply of request for repair. So once the buyer signs, they send it over to the seller with all the attached documentation or the inspections of pest, home, roof, chimney, whatever else they got. They check the box and they attach those reports to the request for repair. Because if this escrow falls apart, the seller is responsible to give these reports to the second buyer. Now, how does the seller respond? Well, it tells you right here in this seller's response paragraph. It says that I put down here red, buyer may cancel based upon either finance or inspection contingency. If the lender requires those repairs, the buyer may not get the finance, so they can cancel based upon finance. Or if the seller's decided not to do the work based upon the lender's requirements in repairs, then the buyer can cancel based upon inspection as well. Note to seller, FHAVA, if the parties do not reach an agreement on completing the repairs and other actions specified in the paragraph of 3A of the buyer's FHA or VA section of buyer's request, buyer's FHA or VA lender will not loan buyer the funds needed to purchase the property. If that happens, if there is a finance contingency that has not been removed, buyer may cancel this agreement by using the cancellation of contract. The cancellation of contract deals with three things. It deals with cancellation of contract, the disposition of the deposit, and cancellation of escrow. So here in the seller agreement, the seller can check the box and go, hey, I'm going to do it all. So they go check the first one. They do all. Let's say the seller's going, I'm not doing it all, but I'm just going to do a portion of it. They would check this box and this box. This box indicating that they're only going to do some of it. This box deleting the items that they are not going to do. That's what I put here. Exclude what seller will not repair. Now let's say the seller's going to say, I'm not going to do anything. What I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can get the buyer just happy if I give them a credit. Then they can come up with a credit, and they'll give the credit at the close of escrow. Or seller might say, I'm not going to give them a credit. What if I just reduce the price? Could be an all-cash offer. So let's just say I'm just going to reduce the price. So the revised purchase price shall be, and they can just reduce the price. In the additional conditions in yellow, I highlighted, seller's agreement only applies if buyers remove those contingencies identified on any attached contingency removal form by signing and delivering it within the time specified in paragraph 1D. And so here they're going to say, all right, I'm going to attach a contingency removal form, and I'm going to identify the contingencies that I want the buyer to remove if I move forward as a seller in this paragraph here. And so now we got expiration. The expiration, it tells you it can be deemed revoked unless by 5 p.m. on the third day. If there's nothing that happens, this does expire, and it will expire on the third day at 5 p.m. Or they can just write in the time that they want the buyer to respond by so they can keep this whole process moving. It says here in paragraph 2, seller responds to buyer's request on the attached form, which is the seller's response to buyer's reply of request for repair, the RRRR form. Or the seller can check the box. Buyer's requests are not incorporated into this agreement. Seller responds to buyer's request on the attached amendment to existing agreement. So they could use the AAA. No seller signature is required on this request for repair if they want to respond back on the RRRR form, or if they want to respond back on the AEA form. Or the seller can just check the box and say, I'm not doing anything. I'm checking the box. The seller's not agreed to any of buyer's request. Seller's responds to buyers on request for repair on the terms above. Or if the seller wants to respond regarding these terms above on page 1, then the seller will sign the request for repair and date it and give it back to the buyer after the sellers check the appropriate boxes on how they want to respond to the buyer. The buyers then will receive the request for repair, and when the buyer's response to seller's partial condition, they do not sign until after the seller responds above. So the buyer's not going to sign here in the beginning. They're going to wait to hear back from the seller here, and then the buyer's going to respond. Now, what are the options that the buyer has? It tells you, buyer accepts seller's partial conditional agreement. Option 1, buyer does not accept seller's partial agreement. Buyer withdraws request for repair number 1 and makes a new request. And so then they'll have request for repair number 2. Or buyer response. Buyer may respond to seller's partial agreement on the terms above and acknowledges receipt of copy by making this buyer's response. Any previous buyer response, seller's reply, or seller's partial agreement can no longer be accepted. So anything that has been created prior to any other further documents being created is going to be deleted. So if the buyer's created a request for repair, and the buyers add a new request for repair, then the request for repair number 1 is to be deleted. The seller's response and buyer's reply, that's to be deleted. Those go away. And then you just kind of start all over again. Okay? And then once the buyer checks the appropriate boxes and responds to the seller on what they want to do with the request for repair, whether it's to accept, whether it's they don't agree and they want to have another request for repair, then the buyers will sign and date. And that is it for page 2 of the request for repair. Take care.